Again, Jack Sullivan's voice carried across the training ground as another squad of Earth's finest picked themselves off the dirt. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the SAS training facility in Hereford, now shared with the Galactic Defense Coalition's Special Operations Command. Above them, Drachnid Commander Zex Thor's mandibles clicked in what passing humans had learned was their species' equivalent of a sneer. His crystalline armor caught the sunlight, refracting it in dazzling patterns across the observation platform. Primitive. Zex Thor's translated voice boomed through the external speakers. Your best operators cannot even breach a simple quantum-locked barrier. Perhaps they would be better suited to cleaning our barracks. Sullivan kept his face neutral, though his jaw clenched tight enough to ache. 6 months of this. 6 months of watching Earth's most elite warriors reduced to training dummies for the GDC's enhanced Commandos. The aliens' neural-linked targeting systems and phase-shift armor made a mockery of human combat doctrine. With respect, Commander, Sullivan called up, choosing his words carefully. There's more to special operations than superior technology. A ripple of clicking laughter spread through the assembled alien observers. Their towering insectoid forms gleamed with cybernetic enhancements and quantum tech armor that cost more than a year's budget for most human special forces units. Is that what you tell yourselves? Zex Thor's translator struggled to convey the full contempt in his harmonics. Your species still trains with projectile weapons and practices. What do you call it? Hand-to-hand combat. More clicking laughter. How quaint. Sullivan watched as the Drachnid demonstration team activated their phase shift generators, literally walking through the reinforced walls of the kill house. Their neural targeting systems painted every target with perfect accuracy, even through solid obstacles. The exercise was over in seconds. Observe efficiency, humans, Zex Thor announced. This is why the GDC's combat doctrine will supersede your obsolete methods. Your role in the coalition should reflect your limitations. That was it. Sullivan had enough. Run it clean, he said quietly. The clicking laughter stopped. Clarify. Human. Run the courts without your tech. No quantum armor, no neural links, no enhanced targeting. Sullivan stepped forward, his combat boots crunching on the gravel. Show us how superior you are with just your natural abilities. The atmosphere changed instantly. The Drachnid observers' mandibles ceased their constant motion, their compound eyes fixed on their commander. You suggest we lower ourselves to your level. Zex Thor's translator crackled with indignation. We are the elite of 17 systems. We do not need to probe. Afraid. Sullivan interrupted, knowing he was pushing diplomatic boundaries. 20 years in Delta Force before transferring to the SAS had taught him sometimes boundaries needed pushing. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the human operators held their breath, recognizing a watershed moment. You forget your place, human, Zex Thor finally responded. We are not here to indulge your primitive pride. The GDC has already determined the most efficient allocation of species resources. Your kind will serve admirably in support roles, maintaining equipment and managing logistics. Sullivan nodded slowly, letting his gaze sweep across the alien observers. Funny thing about efficiency, Commander. It's comfortable. Makes you dependent. But what happens when your quantum tech fails? When your neural links get jammed? When you have to operate in environments that fry your fancy gear? Theoretical scenarios do not. Zex Thor began. The facility's lights died. The quantum barriers flickered and vanished. Every piece of advanced tech went dark. Sullivan smiled in the sudden silence. He'd called in a favor, a focused EMP burst from a training device, harmless but effective. How about a practical scenario instead? He offered into the darkness, where the Drachnid Commandos stood frozen, suddenly stripped of their technological advantages. The lights flickered back on. Zex Thor's compound eyes blazed with fury. This demonstration is concluded, the alien commander announced. We will be filing a formal complaint about this unauthorized test. As the aliens filed out, Sullivan caught fragments of their untranslated communication. rapid clicks and whistles that his human ears could barely track. But he didn't need a translator to recognize the emotion behind them. Fear. 3 days after the EMP incident, Sullivan sat in GDC headquarters, watching the holographic distress signal flicker. The massive chamber, designed to accommodate 17 different species, felt oppressively quiet as Colonial Administrator Venra's desperate message played again. Critical situation on Novus 9. Research colony. Communications disrupted. Unknown hostiles. Bioweapon signatures detected. Static consumed portions of the transmission. Magnetic anomalies increasing. All advanced systems failing. Requesting immediate special operations response. The message dissolved into noise. Around the briefing table, representatives from the GDC's elite units shifted uncomfortably. Their discomfort wasn't from the message's content. It was from the environment readings scrolling beside it. Novus 9's magnetic field strength has tripled in the past week. The briefing officer, a serpentine Sethid, explained. The planet's core is generating interference that disrupts quantum-based technology. Combined with the 1.8 g gravity, standard GDC combat systems are operating at 23% efficiency, when they function at all. Sullivan noticed Zexthor's mandibles twitching, a sign of agitation he'd learned to recognize. The Drachnid commander had been unusually quiet since entering the chamber. "What about the colonists?" Sullivan asked, studying the planetary scans. "How many?" 243, the Sithid replied. "Mostly researchers and their families. The facility was establishing baselines for xenobiological research, and now potentially being used to test illegal bioweapons," a gravelly voice added. General Hayes, Earth's representative to the GDC Security Council, leaned forward. "We need boots on the ground. Fast." Zexthor's translator crackled to life. "The conditions are unsuitable for effective deployment. Our enhanced operators require stable quantum fields for optimal performance. Under these conditions, we would be operating blind, deaf, and practically paralyzed." "So we do nothing?" Sullivan's question cut through the chamber. "Leave them to die, because the mission isn't optimal." "Your emotional response is noted, human," Zexthor clicked dismissively. "But this is precisely why tactical decisions are left to those with superior analytical capabilities. The risk-reward calculation clearly indicates." "I'll go." The chamber fell silent. Sullivan stood, his chair scraping against the polished floor. One operator. Standard Earth equipment. No quantum tech to fail. No neural links to jam. He locked eyes with Zexthor. "Just the primitive training you mock." Laughter erupted from several alien commanders, but it died quickly when they realized Sullivan wasn't joking. "Impossible," Zexthor declared. "The gravity alone ruled is comparable to what we train for in high-altitude mountain warfare," Sullivan interrupted. "Our rucksacks often weigh half our body weight. We train for exactly these conditions." "And the hostile forces?" a Ketheri commander challenged. "Without quantum armor or targeting systems. We'll do it the old-fashioned way." Sullivan's voice was steel. "The way humans conducted special operations for centuries before joining the GDC. The way we still train, despite your ridicule." General Hayes nodded slowly. "If Commander Sullivan volunteers, I support this mission. Earth forces are accustomed to operating without technological advantages." The alien commanders burst into rapid, overlapping discussions in their native languages. Sullivan caught fragments of betting terms. They were wagering on how quickly he'd call for extraction, if he survived to make the call at all. "Very well," Zexthor finally announced, his mandibles arranged in what Sullivan recognized as their species' expression of smug certainty. "Let the human attempt this suicide mission. It will serve as a valuable demonstration of why our methods are superior." Sullivan was already mentally reviewing his equipment list. Standard rucksack, medical supplies, his old Delta Force combat knife, a modified Earth rifle that wouldn't be affected by the magnetic interference, no fancy quantum tech, no neural links, no powered armor. Just skill, training, and human ingenuity. Dropship leaves in 2 hours, General Hayes announced. Commander Sullivan, you have until then to prepare. As Sullivan headed for the door, Zexthor's translator caught him. I look forward to analyzing the footage of your failure, human. It will make an excellent training video on the obsolescence of primitive methods. Sullivan didn't turn around. Save your analysis for my after-action report, Commander. Assuming your quantum systems can still process primitive data by then. The chamber erupted in clicking and whistling as he left. Let them laugh. Let them bet. They'd learn soon enough. Murphy's Law hit the moment Sullivan's drop pod entered Novus 9's atmosphere. The magnetic interference was worse than predicted, scrambling even the basic guidance systems. He had seconds to make a decision as warning lights flooded the cramped compartment. Computer, switch to manual control, he ordered, grabbing the mechanical backup controls. Old school. Reliable. The pod's AI died with a static whimper as he wrestled with the stick, trying to remember his atmospheric entry training from years ago. The pod screamed through the sky like a meteor, the heat shield barely holding. Sullivan's muscles strained against the increasing G-forces, his breath coming in controlled bursts just like he practiced thousands of times. Under Novus 9's punishing gravity, every movement was a battle. He hit the tree canopy at an angle, the pod's reinforced hull shearing through massive alien branches. The impact drove him against his restraints hard enough to crack ribs. But he was alive. And according to his mechanical compass, only about 80 kilometers off target. Perfect, he muttered, tasting blood. Just perfect. The pod's hatch blew manually, another primitive backup the aliens had mocked during design reviews. Sullivan dragged himself out into the alien forest, each movement feeling like he was wearing full combat gear. The purple-leafed canopy stretched impossibly high, adapted to the heavy gravity. His radio crackled with static. Even basic communications were barely functioning. He was truly alone. First priority. Assess injuries. 2 cracked ribs, various contusions, possible minor concussion. Nothing that would stop a Delta operator. He trained through worse. Second priority. Salvage equipment. His rucksack had survived intact, lightweight carbon fiber instead of quantum storage tech. Simple. Reliable. His modified Earth rifle still worked perfectly, unaffected by the magnetic fields that rendered energy weapons useless. As Sullivan secured his gear, movement caught his eye. Something large was moving through the underbrush about 50 meters out. He froze, remembering the briefing on Novus 9's indigenous life forms. Most were ground-bound predators, evolved for the high gravity. Perfect. He pulled out his camouflage kit, not the advanced photonic stuff, but good old-fashioned face paint and local vegetation. Within minutes, he was practically invisible among the alien foliage. The movement passed without noticing him. Time to earn my pay, he whispered, checking his compass again. 80 kilometers through hostile terrain, under nearly double Earth's gravity, with unknown hostile forces between him and the objective. Just another day at the office. The first few kilometers were the hardest as his body adjusted to the gravity. Each step felt like pushing through wet cement. But humans were persistent predators, evolved for endurance hunting. 1 foot in front of the other, hour after hour. He found the first body near a dried river, a colonial security officer, or what was left of one. The corpse had been stripped of weapons and equipment, but Sullivan's trained eye caught details others might miss. The killing blow hadn't come from energy weapons or quantum tech. This was blade work, professional, methodical. Someone else is playing low-tech, he muttered, studying the ground. The tracks told a story, multiple hostiles, moving with purpose, using the terrain for cover. Not pirates or common criminals. These were trained operators. A distant sound stopped him cold. Gunfire. Not energy weapons, actual ballistic weapons, like his. The reports echoed off the massive trees, distorted by the dense atmosphere. Sullivan checked his map, comparing it to the terrain. The shots came from a valley about 2 kilometers east of his position. not along his planned route to the colony, but something crashed through the underbrush ahead. Sullivan melted into the shadows, his camouflage breaking up his outline. 3 figures burst into view, running hard despite the gravity. Colonial scientists, judging by their clothes. Behind them, barely visible in the purple-tinted light, came the hunters. The hostiles moved like professionals, spreading out to flank their prey. Their equipment was stripped down. No powered armor or energy weapons, just efficient, lethal simplicity. Sullivan's jaw tightened. The mission had just gotten complicated. Primary objective was still the colony and the potential bioweapon, but he couldn't let these people die. Time to show these hunters what it meant to be hunted by someone who'd mastered primitive warfare. The first hunter died without ever knowing Sullivan was there. The second hunter died reaching for his radio. Sullivan's knife found the gap between armored plates, another advantage of obsolete close-quarters combat training. The third hunter managed to spin around, but in Novus 9's crushing gravity, he was too slow. A precise strike to the throat. Silent. Efficient. Sullivan dragged the bodies into the underbrush, his muscles screaming under the increased gravity. The hunter's equipment told him everything he needed to know. Black Ops gear. High-end, but deliberately low-tech. These weren't pirates or mercenaries. This was a government-sanctioned wet work team. Please, don't hurt us. One of the scientists had emerged from hiding, trembling. Elderly Arcturian. The crystalline patterns on his skin dulled with exhaustion. "I'm GDC Special Operations," Sullivan replied, keeping his voice calm. "Commander Sullivan, Earth Forces. Can you tell me what happened to the colony?" The Arcturian scientist's translator crackled with static. They came 3 days ago. Disabled our quantum communications first. Then the security systems. His crystalline patterns flickered with distress. Their cracks Imperial forces. Black Division. Sullivan's blood ran cold. The Cracks Empire, technically GDC allies, but known for pushing ethical boundaries in weapons development. If they were running a black op here, the bioweapon research, he said, what were you really studying? Not studying. Containing. A second scientist emerged, a Sethid female, her scales dark with fatigue. We detected an anomaly in the deep sample vault. Something engineered. We were preparing to alert the GDC when they came. The third scientist remained hidden, but Sullivan could hear labored breathing. Injured, probably. "How many hostiles at the colony?" he asked, stripping useful gear from the dead hunters. 30, maybe 40, the Arcturian replied, led by Commander Vexka. He enjoys his work. Sullivan had heard of Vexka. The Cracks commander had a reputation for ruthless efficiency and a particular hatred for lesser species. Perfect. A distant explosion lit up the purple sky. The colony. "They're destroying evidence," the Sethid scientist hissed. "The containment protocols." "How long?" Sullivan interrupted. "Hours, maybe less. If they breach the vault seals." She left the sentence hanging. Sullivan did the math. The colony was still 15 kilometers away. In this gravity, with 3 civilians, 1 injured, it would take too long on foot. Then he noticed the hunter's gear included grappling equipment. Low-tech, mechanical, reliable. He smiled. "How's your climbing?" he asked the scientists. The next 2 hours were a masterclass in human ingenuity. Sullivan rigged a system of pulleys and ropes through the massive tree canopy, using the hunter's gear to create a makeshift transit system. In the high gravity, ground movement was exhausting, but letting gravity work for them, swinging from tree to tree like Earth's primitive ancestors. They covered 12 kilometers in those 2 hours. The injured scientist, a young Hylian with plasma burns, barely held on, but they made it. The colony came into view as purple dusk settled. Sullivan's enhanced optics, simple light gathering, no quantum tech, showed him everything he needed to see. The Cracks had fortified key positions, but they'd grown complacent, Why worry about attack when no advanced forces could operate in these conditions? Their security relied on powered armor and energy shields they couldn't use. "Stay here," he told the scientists, hiding them in a defensible position. "If I'm not back in 3 hours, use this." He handed them a simple radio beacon. It's shielded against the magnetic interference. "GDC forces will find you. You're going in alone." The Arcturians' patterns flickered with disbelief. Against 40 Cracks Commandos. Sullivan checked his rifle, lined up his throwing knives, and secured his combat webbing. All simple, all reliable, all deadly in trained hands. "They're used to fighting enemies with superior technology," he said quietly. "They've forgotten how to face someone who kills the old-fashioned way." He looked at the colony, already planning his approach. Time to remind them what humans learned in 10,000 years of warfare. He disappeared into the gathering darkness like a ghost, leaving the scientists to wonder if they'd imagined him entirely. Inside the colony, the first alarms were about to sound. The first Cracks guard died silently, never seeing the shadow that closed his throat with precision pressure. Sullivan dragged the body into the maintenance shaft, a tight fit in this gravity, but perfect for someone trained in confined space warfare. 2 minutes later, the second guard's radio crackled. "Section 3, report." Sullivan keyed the stolen radio, perfectly mimicking the dead guard's grunt, a skill learned in countless Earth operations, long before universal translators. The Cracks commander, satisfied, moved on. Then Sullivan heard the screaming. He ghosted through the maintenance tunnels, following the sound to a sealed laboratory. Through the observation window, he saw Commander Vexka, 7 feet of scaled arrogance, standing over a group of colonial children. 3 species, all huddled together in terror. "Your parents' cooperation has been insufficient," Vexka's translator boomed. "Perhaps this will motivate them." Sullivan's blood went cold as he saw the injection device in the commander's hand. Field testing. They were using children for field testing. Training said maintain stealth. Complete the mission. The bioweapon vault was 2 levels down. The smallest child, a young Hylian like the injured scientist outside, whimpered. "Screw it," Sullivan whispered, and kicked in the door. The next 30 seconds were chaos. 2 guards went down before they could raise weapons, precise shots through gap points in their armor. Sullivan's obsolete projectile weapon punched through unshielded plating like it was paper. Vexka spun with impressive speed, but Sullivan was already moving. The injection device shattered against the wall as a thrown combat knife pinned the commander's hand to a console. "Children, to me." Sullivan's translator barked in 3 languages. The kids ran, showing more trust in the human stranger than their captors. But Vexka was already calling reinforcements. "Seal all sections," the Cracks commander roared, ripping his hand free. "The human dies now." Sullivan grabbed the children and ran, his muscles screaming under the doubled weight in this gravity. Behind them, boots thundered on metal decking. The Cracks were adapting, switching to projectile weapons that would work in the magnetic interference. "Hold tight," he told the kids, and kicked open a maintenance hatch. The shaft dropped 3 levels, normally used for cargo transit. The children screamed as they plunged into darkness. Sullivan's grappling line played out with controlled speed. 10 meters down, he spotted his target, a horizontal junction, barely large enough to crawl through. They swung in just as bullets sparked off the shaft walls. "Quiet now," he whispered to the terrified children. The little Hylian nodded, helping shush the others. "Smart kid." They crawled through cramped tunnels for what felt like hours. Sullivan's cracked ribs screamed with every movement, but he kept going. The children followed silently, understanding their lives depended on stealth. Finally, they reached a secure storage room. Sullivan had spotted it during his initial infiltration, defensible with multiple escape routes. "Rest," he told the kids, breaking out emergency rations from his pack. As they ate, he treated their injuries, mostly dehydration and terror, thankfully. "The parents," the young Hylian said suddenly. "They're in the testing chambers, Level B2. Right above the bioweapon vault. Of course. Sullivan checked his ammunition. 3 magazines left. 2 grenades. 4 throwing knives. Not enough for a frontal assault against 30-plus commandos. But then, humans hadn't survived this long by fighting fair. He pulled out his map, studying the maintenance system. The cracks were trained soldiers, dangerous and skilled, but they fought like soldiers, expecting attacks from tactical angles. They weren't thinking like a hunter, like someone whose ancestors had stalked prey through ancient forests with nothing but stone tools and determination. New plan, he told the children, pointing to the ventilation system. I'm going to teach you something we called psychological warfare back on Earth. The kids gathered around as he explained, their eyes growing wider with each detail. By the end, even the little Hylian was grinning. Time to remind the cracks why humans were classified as pursuit predators. The hunt was about to begin. The first phase of psychological warfare started with whispers. Sullivan had positioned the children strategically throughout the ventilation system, teaching them to mimic sounds that would echo through the metal corridors. Ancient hunting tricks, passed down from when humans stalked larger predators across primordial savannas. The cracks' commandos, already on edge from losing contact with 6 patrol teams, started jumping at shadows. They're everywhere. Watch Sector 4. Movement in the ceiling. Sullivan smiled grimly as he crawled through a maintenance shaft. The kids were natural voice mimics, another primitive skill the cracks had forgotten to account for. Their fake radio chatter and phantom footsteps had the enemy shooting at ghosts. Below him, in the primary testing chamber, he could see the colonial scientists, parents of the children he'd rescued, being forced to work on computer systems analyzing the bioweapons' effects. Vexka paced among them, his scaled hide darkening with rage as another false alarm drew off more of his troops. Find that human. The cracks' commander roared. He's making us look like amateur. The lights went out. Phase 2. In the darkness, Sullivan moved. He'd memorized the layout, knew every corner and threshold. The cracks, for all their enhanced vision, still instinctively hesitated when blinded. The first commando died silently, knife between the armor plates. The second managed half a scream before Sullivan's garrowed wire found his throat. By the time emergency lighting sputtered on, 3 more guards were down, their bodies hidden in ceiling panels and storage lockers. Impossible, Vexka's translator crackled. No one can move that fast in this gravity. But Sullivan wasn't moving fast. He was moving smart, using terrain and timing, just like his instructors had drilled into him countless times. Let the enemy's imagination do half the work. Time for Phase 3. The children, on his signal, began their practiced routine, tapping on vents, scraping metal, mimicking the sound of movement through walls. Not random noises, a carefully choreographed pattern that suggested multiple attackers converging from all directions. The cracks' commandos, elite soldiers though they were, began to break. Their rigid military discipline worked against them as they tried to maintain tactical formations in an environment that defied tactical logic. "Sir," one of Vexka's officers shouted, "the vault. Security systems are failing." Sullivan allowed himself a grim smile as he pulled the detonator from his pocket. Amazing what you could do with industrial cleaning chemicals and basic demolitions training. The small charges he planted would never breach the reinforced vault doors. But they weren't meant to. They were meant to trigger the fire suppression system. The explosion was tiny, barely more than a pop. But the response was immediate. Alarms blared. Emergency containment protocols activated. And from hidden vents, industrial-grade fire suppressant began flooding the lower levels. "No," Vexka roared, realizing too late what was happening. "Seal thee." But Sullivan had already sabotaged the containment doors. The chemical fog rolled in, thick and disorienting. Non-toxic, but when combined with the local atmospheric pressure, cracks' commandos began dropping, their respiratory systems unable to process the dense mixture. Those still standing fired blindly into the fog, their shots going wide as Sullivan moved among them like a ghost. The vault. Vexka was screaming now. Get to the vault. We can't lose the weapon. Exactly as planned. Sullivan triggered his final surprise, the industrial coolant lines he'd rigged to burst. In the heavy gravity, the liquid turned to instant fog, flash freezing everything it touched. The screams echoed through the facility as Crack's Commandos found themselves trapped in rapidly forming ice. Their armor, designed for combat, offered no protection against the extreme cold. Through it all, Sullivan moved with purpose toward his real target, the testing chamber's control room, where Vexka was frantically trying to save his weapon data. The Crack's commander spun as Sullivan emerged from the fog, knife ready. What are you? Vexka's translator stuttered. Sullivan's voice was ice. Just a primitive human, remember? Now let's discuss what you were planning to do with that bioweapon. Behind them, in the fog and darkness, the sound of approaching GDC rescue ships finally broke through the interference. The hunt was over. Vexka moved with desperate speed, his clawed hand smashing the emergency release on the bioweapon containment cylinder. The pressurized canister hissed as deadly particles began venting into the chamber. If I die, the Crack's commander snarled, I take you and every inferior species in this facility with me. Sullivan was already moving, his body fighting against Novus 9's crushing gravity. The knife left his hand in a perfect arc, not aimed at Vexka, but at the environmental control panel behind him. Sparks flew as ancient human steel severed crucial circuits. You fool, Vexka laughed. You've trapped us both in here with a weapon designed to target specific genetic markers, Sullivan finished, pulling his brother mask from his vest. Funny thing about inferior human technology. We learned to filter air the hard way, long before we had quantum purifiers. The Crack's commander's scales darkened with rage as he realized his mistake. The bioweapon, designed to attack specific alien DNA sequences, was already affecting him. His movements became jerky, uncoordinated. Impossible, you knew. I read the research data while you were chasing ghosts, Sullivan said through his mask. Your weapon targets the modified genome sequences that make your species superior. The same sequences absent in primitive humans. Vexka roared, charging with berserk strength. Even affected by the weapon, even in crushing gravity, he was incredibly dangerous. His claws raked Sullivan's armor, finding flesh beneath. Sullivan rolled with the impact, using the Crack's momentum against him. Basic judo, developed on Earth centuries ago. In the high gravity, Vexka couldn't recover from the throw. He crashed into a bank of computers, shattering screens. All your enhanced genetics, Sullivan growled, pressing his advantage. All your superior evolution. And you forgot the most basic survival trait, adaptability. The fight was brutal, primal. Vexka's enhanced strength versus Sullivan's lifetime of hand-to-hand combat training. They crashed through lab equipment, neither willing to yield. Blood, both human red and Crack's blue, spattered the floors. Sullivan's ribs screamed as Vexka landed a crushing blow, but he countered with an elbow strike to the commander's throat, targeting natural weaknesses no amount of genetic enhancement could eliminate. Your empire, Vexka gasped, the weapon increasingly affecting his system, will never allow. Your empire, Sullivan interrupted, blocking another wild swing, is about to learn why humans earned our place in the GDC. He drove his knee into the commander's midsection, centuries of refined fighting techniques compressed into one devastating strike. Vexka stumbled, his enhanced body finally betraying him as the weapon took full effect. The bioweapon data, the Crack's commander wheezed, is already transmitting to GDC headquarters, Sullivan finished. Amazing what you can do with a simple radio and the right frequency to cut through magnetic interference. Another primitive solution. Vexka lunged one final time, his claws aimed at Sullivan's throat. But his enhanced muscles, his superior reflexes, his genetic modifications, all worked against him now. The bioweapon had turned his advantages into fatal weaknesses. Sullivan sidestepped and struck, one precise blow to a nerve cluster. The crack's commander collapsed, paralyzed but conscious. "You should have studied human history," Sullivan said, zip-tying the commander's hands. "We didn't survive ice ages and predators, and our own wars by being superior. We survived by adapting, by turning weaknesses into strengths." The facility's atmospheric processors hummed as they filtered the weapon from the air. Throughout the complex, the sounds of GDC rescue teams echoed. They'd finally found a way through the interference. Sullivan keyed his radio, using the frequency he'd discovered in the research data. "This is Commander Sullivan. Facility secured. Bioweapon contained. 43 prisoners for pickup." He looked at the paralyzed Crack's commander, "including one who needs a very special cell." "Acknowledged," a familiar voice crackled back. "Zexthor, your performance has been most educational, human." Sullivan allowed himself a grim smile as he began checking on the rescued scientists. "Glad I could provide a learning experience, Commander. Now, about those training reforms we discussed." Behind him, Vexka watched with impotent rage as his carefully planned operation and his entire worldview crumbled in the face of simple human ingenuity. 2 weeks after Novus 9, Sullivan stood before the GDC Special Operations Command. The massive chamber was packed. Representatives from every member species crowded the tiered seating. Even the Crack's Empire had sent observers, though their delegation sat in stony silence. "The implications of Commander Sullivan's mission are clear," General Hayes was saying. "Our reliance on advanced technology has created critical vulnerabilities in our special operations capabilities." Zexthor, his mandibles arranged in an expression Sullivan now recognized as respectful attention, activated his translator. "The humans' unconventional methods achieved what our most elite units deemed impossible. This cannot be ignored." Sullivan suppressed a smile, remembering the betting pool. He wondered how many quantum credits had changed hands over his survival. "Therefore," Hayes continued, "we are announcing the formation of a new Joint Special Operations Unit. The Advanced Warfare Adaptation Division will focus on combining human tactical doctrines with GDC technology." Murmurs filled the chamber. Sullivan caught fragments of translated discussions, skepticism mixing with grudging respect. "Commander Sullivan will oversee training," Hayes added, triggering another wave of murmurs. "His first class begins tomorrow." The next morning, Sullivan stood before 20 of the GDC's most elite operators, 3 Drachnid, 2 Sethid, 4 Ketheri, even a single Crack's volunteer, all watching him with mixture of curiosity and lingering doubt. "Your first task," Sullivan announced, "is simple. Remove your quantum armor. Deactivate your neural links. Power down your enhanced targeting systems." Shocked protest erupted from the assembled warriors. The Crack's operator, scales darkening with anger, stepped forward. "This is absurd. Without our equipment." "Without your equipment," Sullivan interrupted, "you'll learn to truly fight." He hefted his old rucksack. 40 kilometers, full pack, through urban terrain, wilderness, and swamp. No tech assistance. "Impossible in this gravity," a Drachnid protested. Sullivan smiled. "That's what they said about Novus 9. He pointed to the training course visible through the armored windows. "The human body can adapt to nearly double Earth's gravity through proper training. Your enhanced bodies can handle more. But first," he tossed each operator a basic combat knife. "You need to learn the old ways." "And if we refuse?" the Cracks challenged. "Then you prove what I suspected on Novus 9, Sullivan replied. "That you've forgotten the fundamental truth of special operations. The warrior matters more than the weapons." One by one, quantum armor powered down. Neural links disconnected. Enhanced targeting systems went dark. Soon 20 elite operators stood in basic combat gear, looking surprisingly vulnerable. "Good," Sullivan said. "Now let me show you how humans have been fighting and winning for thousands of years." not with superior technology. He drew his knife, light glinting off the blade, but with superior adaptation, determination, and the will to never quit. He saw it in their eyes then. The beginning of understanding, the recognition that perhaps their technological superiority had become a crutch. One final thing, Sullivan added. After we complete the physical training, we'll study history. Earth's history. Because every human victory, every survival against impossible odds, teaches the same lesson. It's not about being the strongest or most advanced. It's about being the most adaptable. The Crack's operator studied his knife, then looked up with newfound respect. Teach us, Commander. As Sullivan led them into the training course, he thought about those desperate hours on Novus 9, about children hiding in ventilation shafts, helping defeat an elite military force, about scientists learning to fight with improvised weapons, about the fundamental truth that had kept humanity alive through countless challenges. Adaptation wasn't just a survival trait. It was a weapon more powerful than any quantum technology. Welcome to Human Special Operations, he called to his students. Let's see what you're really made of. Behind him, 20 of the galaxy's most elite warriors began to learn what humans had known all along. True strength comes not from superior technology or enhanced genetics, but from the willingness to adapt, improvise, and overcome. The age of human special operations doctrine had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same.